Hi, let's have a look at Bitcoin's on-chain data. So the data that is derived from the transactions on the blockchain. So we are not just looking at price data, we are actually looking at what's going on under the hood. And let's not waste too much time. Let's directly start off with the data. This data comes from the glassnode newsletter. So every week glassnode brings out a newsletter and the charts are from that newsletter. Link is also in the video description. So first we've got the percent of Bitcoin supply currently in profit. And it looks like there's some kind of consolidation happening at around the 70% level. So when there's a rally, right, this chart starts in March 2020. When there's a rally, almost everybody is in profit. And then when a correction comes, people tend to get into losses. And in this recent bull market, right, one could argue that since that Corona crash over here, we are pretty much in a bull market with an extended sideways period in the last year. Whenever we hover around 70% of Bitcoin supply being in profit, we tend to get a bounce back up, right? The price tends to go up. So in case you haven't noticed yet, right, in gray, we've got the price in US dollar and in orange is the percentage in profit. And so what's interesting about this is that there's always a new floor, meaning Bitcoin changes hands from time to time and a new reference price is formed to a certain degree, right? So over here, we were at around 10K or so when 70 to 80% of people were in profit. Then we went up. And then after that correction, we were at around 30 to 40K, but the same percentage of supply was in profit. And with this recent correction again, which is higher compared to the summer correction of last year, we are again at similar levels. So the reference price over time is increasing, which is a good thing, right? So this hints at Bitcoin over the long term going up in price. And of course, we do have corrections, right? This was a 50% correction basically, but still the current reference price here at around 40K is higher than what we had in summer of last year. Now, this is the percent supply in profit. Next, we've got the realized profit. So when did altcoins actually sell, right? When did altcoins move and what kind of profit did they realize? And we can see when we've got a big spike over here, right? When altcoins tend to sell, we do potentially get somewhat of a correction afterwards. Doesn't have to come, but at least this is how it looked like in the past. And the all-time high here of realized profit was just before we had this correction in Q4 of last year. So currently we are pretty low on this, which is potentially a good sign, right? At least historically speaking, low values on this realized profit metric tend to be a positive sign, which does make sense. Profits only get realized when prices tend to go up. And that basically means with this increased price, it's not just short-term holders, not just short-term traders that are part of the supply equation, but it's also the long-term holders that tend to sell and add additional supply and thus depress the price potentially. But that's currently not the case, right? Currently, we seem to be looking in somewhat of a safe zone. Now let's flip this. So this is the realized profit. Let's look at realized loss. So this is when people had to sell basically. So we get this incredible spike over here during the crash of last year in May, June. And that's basically deleveraging events. That's how Glassnode calls it. So it's when short-term traders, they take on levered positions. They have to sell simply because of too much of a short-term move. And what I found interesting about this chart is really how you get additional data from looking at the blockchain. I would not have expected similar kind of moves here in July of last year or in December of last year because the price itself didn't move much. But still, people kind of gave up their hopes. We went down. We didn't continue this rally anymore. People probably went into Bitcoin hoping for a continued rally, which didn't happen. And so people just realized their losses, which is, again, I think a positive sign because it establishes a new reference price and money moves from the short-term speculators to the long-term holders potentially. And that's exactly where you want the Bitcoin to be, right? You want it to be held by long-term investors that ride out potential waves and that can stabilize the price over the long term. And so next we've got two charts that look into this short-term, long-term holder dynamic in a bit more detail. So this over here is 7 years of data approximately. First, we've got our incredible bull market where we went up to 20K in Bitcoin. And then we've got our second rally that basically went sideways since the beginning of last year. And what tends to happen is when there's a lot of Bitcoin, a lot of the supply held by the short-term traders, what tends to happen is that the long-term rally reverses, which does make sense, right? The more money is held by the long-term holders, the more the supply gets reduced, and reduced supply leads to increased prices. But once the Bitcoin moves to short-term holders, they're more willing to trade in and out of it, even when just facing very short-term volatility. And that's exactly what happened here in January 2018, and what also happened, but to a less significant degree, at the beginning of last year. Now, this does not mean when most Bitcoin are held by long-term holders that the price can't drop anymore, right? This is a nice line over here, but it's not necessarily perfect for predicting or for timing bottoms. Because look at this value over here was already relatively low, but this here was another drop of around 50% from 6K to 3K. So you always have to be prepared. Bitcoin can, even though it's not heated at a certain point in time, it can still crash massively. So currently it doesn't look too bad, right? Not a lot of speculation happening. A lot of people are simply just holding, but don't be worried in case we do go down again. Over the long term, Bitcoin tends to increase. The long-term supply is capped, right? There's never more than 21 million. Fiat does not have any cap. And so Bitcoin has to rise versus fiat over the long term. At least that's my opinion, right? No financial advice, but that's how I see it. Bitcoin is basically a replacement for gold. And when there's so much inflation going around right now, where else would you like to park your money? What other place is there than Bitcoin, which tends to go up around 70% per annum? At least that's what another model, the logarithmic regression, tends to imply. This here is a breakdown of more or less the same thing that we see here. Again, we see those waves of short-term speculators up to 3 months in this case, and we have a longer time horizon over here, right? Since Bitcoin was just a few cents since the very beginning. And so what we can also see is that even though this is not significant, there tends to be a slight decline in those peaks. So over the very, very long term, there's more and more people that just hold Bitcoin, that don't just want to ride those waves. It's really a matter of simply looking at it over the long term, not zooming in too much and then forgetting what the long-term picture is. The long-term picture for Bitcoin is positive. And even in the short term, it doesn't look incredibly dangerous, right? But still, Bitcoin is volatile. It's way more volatile than stocks. So adjust your allocation accordingly. Here's one trend I find very interesting. This is again a bit more short term, starting in March of last year, basically looking at the sideways trading range that we are in. And in orange, we have the open interest of the perpetual futures. So in other words, how much active speculation is there going on for Bitcoin? And usually what happens is that when this value is very high, that we get a pretty strong movement, either to the upside or to the downside. So a high value here on the perpetual open interest means that volatility can potentially go up. What's interesting about this recent decline is that even though the price hasn't moved much, speculation on Bitcoin is going down, which again, I see as a positive sign, right? You don't want too much of a violent movement potentially. And so this is just the same picture, just zoomed out again. The trading volume of those perpetual futures, it is declining, and that can be interpreted as an expression of Bitcoin moving from the short-term holders to the long-term investors. The short-term traders nowadays, they have the altcoins, right? And in the altcoins, there is more inefficiencies potentially. The market is smaller. There are potentially less skilled people in that market. And so if you want to simply beat the market, make money by being the best trading a certain asset, then Bitcoin is probably already too efficient for most people. And that's, I think, is the reason why a lot of this active trading tends to decline for Bitcoin, but it potentially might increase for the altcoins. So this is how to sum it all up. There's less excitement around Bitcoin. There is less short-term speculation around Bitcoin. The reference price of supply and profit is pretty much at a low level, assuming we continue the bull market. And so both short-term and long-term Bitcoin doesn't look too bad when interpreting this on-chain data. But again, nobody can call the bottoms perfectly. The way I approach this is I do have some exposure to Bitcoin, but still, in case we do drop further, which is very much possible, I am prepared to buy even more because I like to bet on the long term, and I like to have my money rather in a long-term appreciating asset with a limited supply than in a depreciating asset. such as the US dollar, that can inflate by 10% per year. If you enjoyed this video, you're probably also going to like the premium membership. You can ask me any questions in a private chat over there. There's exclusive content around portfolio management, around technical analysis. So feel free to check that out. thebitcoinstrategy.com is the link. Of course, a like on this video would be appreciated as well because it will help the channel grow. Feel free to subscribe as well. I publish videos regularly. Last but not least, there's also a public Telegram channel, the Bitcoin Strategy channel. Simply search for this term over here within the Telegram app. See you next time. Bye-bye.